two topics here we've got on today's Monday episode. One is kind of bringing back, talking about what I talked a little bit about on Friday, which was the Fanatics announced their show that they're doing, basically. And then the other one is Fanatics also, and that's what I'm going to talk about first, actually, on this show. It's an expansion of the buyback program. Alex Pereira, who fought in UFC 300. I didn't even realize UFC 300 was this past weekend. I knew that it was coming up, but I didn't realize that this was like the show, which I don't really follow the UFC that much, but it seemed like the card was a little bit underwhelming, if I'm going to be honest. Like, I know Conor McGregor is making a comeback. I don't know. That should be, I don't know, interesting. I mean, it's good from a Topps perspective because you're going to be able to make more Conor McGregor cards eventually when, they start doing press conferences and there'll be stuff like that. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see. No, they probably have Topps now UFC cards. I think they probably do. Now that I'm saying it out loud. But either way, so we'll probably see some of that. We'll probably see, I don't know, hopefully a UFC. I keep saying UFC product come out around that time when Conor McGregor is going to be fighting. But either way, like I said, they're expanding with UFC with the buyback program here, which I actually think that Topps should be expanding this even more to, I just think that the buyback program is such a good idea because I feel like base cards in general, you open up and then they just end up in a box somewhere. Like, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what some people do with base cards. You could donate them, sure. I think that's probably, for the most part, I don't open as many boxes anymore, but when I was opening up a lot of boxes, eventually I pretty much just was donating like 10 boxes at a time. Like, when I would go to donate clothes, I just bring the boxes of cards that have already been opened to, Goodwill or Savers or wherever I was bringing them to. But again, sports cards, something that I've talked about on other shows, is sports cards should be an industry that is rotating. Not rotating. The money should be flowing throughout the industry. Self-sustaining. That's the term I'm looking for. In best case scenario, it's self-sustaining. So, yeah, I mean, sure, with the buyback program, you're not getting cash. Like, you're getting credit, which is fine, because I think then, for the most part, if you're getting credit, then you're using it at the hobby shop, supporting small businesses, and you're also still buying sports cards, and the money isn't leaving the ecosystem of sports cards. That's where I think ultimately what we'll look at over the past few years has been a lot of money that was made in sports cards left the market. Because I think for a while, for probably like 2019 to 2021, all the money that was being made within sports cards, for the most part, I think, and this is maybe a generalization, I think for the most part, a lot of it was just end up coming back and being in the hobby again. Like, it was a lot of people buying and selling cards and then just using the money to buy and sell cards. But I think over the past, few years, now that we're in 2024, some of that money that had been going through the system had been taken out, which is why I think we're seeing such a downtick in a lot of prices of cards. I'm sure there are tons of other reasons why, I think, but I think that's one that ultimately is a big deal. And this buyback program helps the hobby be more self-sustaining. I know that they probably wouldn't do this with rookie cards, so it's probably going to have to be some sort of veteran themed concept that they would be doing with this for baseball, at least. I'm talking, with UFC, I think honestly any sport that they have, they should be trying to do this potentially. Soccer, they could probably do it with soccer. Baseball obviously is kind of the one I'm talking about on this podcast, where if they were to do, I don't know, they could do like an all-star break one. They could do, I don't know if they would be able to do it every month necessarily, because that kind of changing the rules every month may not necessarily be the right move. But I think expanding it for baseball to more than just the MVPs really is a good idea, in my opinion, because it, like I said, you're not getting cash really for these cards. You're getting store credit, which, if you're getting store credit, then you're going to have to buy something else with the money that you got with the store credit. So again, it's keeping the cycle going, which I think is a good idea. They're expanding with UFC. Now the other topic is the Fanatics show. Apparently, it's the same weekend as one of the other big card shows that's considered the East Coast National, from what I've seen. I guess I would be interested to know if it's going to be similar to like the Mint Collective, where it's a card show, but it's also, because from what I've seen Mike Rubin talk about it, he said that he's trying to make it like a Comic-Con almost of sports cards. Which, I don't know. I guess that does make sense. I mean, I think that's a good idea, expanding these live shows and making them more into Comic-Con style events. I mean, I think if you're trying to attract people that maybe aren't into sports cards to come to one of these shows, or like if the show is in the area and they go, like, I think that adding something that makes it a little bit different than just a card show, because if it's just a card show, realistically, you're not going to get the audience that I think Fanatics is really looking to get with this type of thing. They're trying to probably get more of an audience who is maybe more evergreen, like, or an audience who is greener than like new, trying to get them to come to an event and see what Fanatics wants you to think sports cards are all about. I guess that's one. I think that's maybe a positive and a negative, because it should be probably a pretty cool event, but it's also like it's Fanatics putting its foot down and saying this is what this is going to be, and we have seen that within cards in general. We've seen Fanatics really jump into the industry and be the entity that says this is what cards is going to be. And I'll be honest with you, they've been pretty ruthless about it. If I'm being 100% honest, like they've been very nonchalantly honest, or they've been very nonchalantly persistent on changing the industry the way they want and doing it the way they want as well. We saw that with, and this is from a business perspective. I think this is sort of, when we're talking, at least if we're talking about business, if we're talking about Fanatics and talking about this type of stuff, if you listen to the show, you probably can assume we're talking about the business side of this. But what I think Fanatics has done, and you could argue whether this is good business or bad business. I think you could argue one way or both ways if I'm going to be completely honest. But like, Fanatics has come in and just said, we're taking over, and there's really nothing you can do about it. So, unfortunately, I do think that can lead to maybe some things that aren't so, popular when it comes to just cards and when it comes to, the industry. I think it can help it in some ways. I think, again, the meme of everyone saying, oh, we're going to 10x the hobby or whatever. It's like, yeah, they're not going to do it in a year. Obviously, they're not going to be able to just do it in 1 year. This is going to take, in my opinion, it's going to take a while, and I think that they probably are realizing it's probably maybe going to take a little bit longer than they expected. They did do a pretty straightforward, like, full-court press this past year to try and really gain some territory within this industry. I mean, obviously, buying Topps is the biggest move of them all, but, like, even before that, even before they bought Topps, they bought the MLB license. So, like, they pretty much were like, yeah, hey, Topps, we know you were going public, but, without your biggest asset, like, you're not going to be able to. Essentially, that's what they did. So I think that they firmly cemented themselves as the top dogs within this industry, and I think they're going to continue to show people that it unfortunately doesn't matter what you want. It matters what we want, and we're going to be the ones dictating how this industry is going to go. Like I said, if that's good, I'm not 100% sure. If that's, we don't really know one way or the other at this point whether that is going to be good or bad. I choose to be optimistic because the pessimistic side of me says that they're going to ruin sports cards forever, and that's not what I want. So I am optimistic in the sense that I don't want that to happen, and so I have to root for them, and I have to, in a way, I don't know if they're listening to this podcast or if they listen to any of my ideas, but think of ways that I think they could make things better. I don't know if that's a possibility, or even, like I said, I don't know if anybody at Fanatics is listening to this podcast necessarily, but just the rooting for Fanatics, the the non-rooting for fanatics, I think is a very, very interesting aspect of the commentary within sports cards, because like, if you're not rooting for cards, you're just rooting for everything to fail. And I guess in some senses, maybe for some people that is going to be a good thing. For a content creator like myself, unfortunately, that's probably not going to be the ideal scenario, if I'm going to be honest. The NBA draft was last night. I think it basically went as many people expected. You know, Caitlin Clark going number 1, Angel Reese still going in the top 10, Cameron Brink going number 2. Chicago is really, really loading up, honestly. Like, they didn't only get Angel Reese, they also got, hold on, I'm looking up her name so I don't, Camila Cardozo, who is a center, like a center, I guess you could call him. I don't know. I was about to say, or power forward, big man. That's what I was about to say, but I guess I don't think you can say that about the WNBA or women's basketball players. So I didn't say that, just to be clear. I thought about saying it and then realized you probably can't say that. So, but either way, so Chicago, they loaded up. They really got like two of probably, if you're looking at like the just the top 10 of the draft, like they got 2 of probably the best like power forward centers in all of college basketball. And I still am learning, if I'm going to be honest, about like the, WNBA. I have followed the WNBA, probably just maybe not as close as, some other sports, but, I think with, Chicago, Indiana, Caitlin Clark, Angel Reese, we're still, and then also Cardoza, who was on South Carolina. We're going to see some interesting rivalries here. And I'm looking at the standings. It doesn't say that they have any like divisions. It looks like it's just 1 through 10. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, it looks like it's just basically, or 12. It looks like it's pretty much just, they have one conference division. So I don't know if they, based on their scheduling. Oh, actually, let's see if there's a schedule here. Looks like there is a schedule. Preseason starts May 3rd. So that's insane. That's in like 2 weeks. That's crazy. And then let's see when the regular season starts. I guess we'll just look at Indiana, see when they face Chicago for the first time. Yeah, I don't know. It's kind of interesting. They don't play Chicago until June. Start of the season, May 14th. I'm not sure which one of these. May 14th, that probably would be the start of the regular season. The preseason starts, that first week of May. And then May 14th, they're at Connecticut. So that's kind of close to me. I don't know. There's a potential that I may go to that game. I'm not 100% sure. But, the big change here, what's going to happen is we're going to shift from Topps making these women's cards to Panini making them. And I don't know. I'm really hoping that, because Panini also, and this was another piece of news that I would have talked about on last Friday's episode as well, or Thursday, whatever episode it was where I did the quick hits. Another big quick hit was that Angel Reese signed an exclusive with Panini. So, I think Angel Reese, maybe not the best player from this draft, but definitely one of the more marketable, biggest names in the whole entire draft, which, again, I don't know why. She should be probably higher. I don't know. She went, I think she got into a really great situation there in Chicago with, those 2 rookies are going to be, very exciting to watch. And then, we're going to see a lot of these Indiana games, too, are on television as well. So I was reading something that, more than 50% of their games have already been moved, or a bunch of their games have been moved to bigger stadiums. And I guess there's a couple things that I want to talk about on this podcast specifically having to do with the WNBA. I hope anyone listening to this podcast, if you were listening to me, I've talked about the WNBA and just women's sports in general for a while. So if you're listening to this podcast, I would imagine we have similar values, similar ways we look at things in life. And one thing that I hope we as sports card collectors, I actually think that we as sports card collectors should take this opportunity to really like embrace the fact that there's going to be more women's cards. Like, one of the things that I saw that was very interesting was the narratives and things that I've seen on social media having to do with WNBA and this year's college is I've seen a lot of people be like actually critiquing the game, which, in the past we've seen, which I still think we've seen. And if you know anybody like this, just be like, dude, shut up. Like the person who's like, oh, I could be Caitlin Clark 1-on-1. It's like you're delusional, and it's very interesting that those types of people still exist in this time. Like the misogyny, and that's what it is, really. Like that's just someone being misogynistic, saying that you could beat Caitlin Clark. So I'm hoping, and this is the point that I'm trying to get across on this podcast and just in general, there is still that type of narrative around women's sports. And I'm hoping as sports card collectors, we can really take the opportunity to start to try and push a lot of that narrative into the past and get rid of it. Because it's just not true. Like, it's like the game has, like I've talked about in the past, the game has gotten better over the past few years, significantly better. Sabrina Ionescu was really, in my opinion, was really a catalyst for the women's game to become a lot more popular. And the age of the league in general is really why I think one of the main reasons why we're seeing a WNBA draft with the top 10. I can probably name almost all of the people within the top 10 of the WNBA draft. I just think, there is a shift, and it's not that the game was bad before. It was, and I think, again, I'm trying to calculate and say these things correctly. You can enjoy a sport or a game that may not be, the NBA or the NFL. Like, and if you're a soccer fan, you know this for sure. Like, there are leagues that are just not as good as other leagues, but the games are still interesting. It's the same thing with the WNBA. Like, sure, there's maybe there aren't as many dunks, maybe there are almost no dunks, but like the game is still good and interesting to watch. Like that's why so many people watch the women's championship and then the women's, against LSU. That's why so many people watch those games. Is because they're realizing that, the game is actually it's pretty good. Like, it's not even that it's like there's a significant, sure, obviously there's going to be a significant difference, but it's not like it's not what everyone I think thinks realistically, if I'm going to be honest. So we are going to see more women's cards. Panini, they would be delusional. It would be delusional of Panini to have the WNBA license right now and not be consistently trying to integrate women's cards into their strategy, into their product strategy. So when that happens, there is going to be the misogyny, unfortunately. I just think that is the way, and unfortunately with sports cards too, it's like, this is like at times this can be it's a boys club. It can be very boys clubby. We definitely have seen, which, I mean, there's so many, Erica, obviously, who, has worked with, Hobbynewsdaily and done stuff with, she's also worked with, Love What You Collect. That's her. That Love What You Collect is her name, I think, on Instagram. And she's done stuff with Hobby Hotline. And obviously we have tons of phenomenal female writers. Kayla. And I'm actually not going to name all of them because if I forget any of them, that would actually just be not good. And I think, like I said, there are so many phenomenal women's voices in this hobby that at some point. I mean, I've never been like this, and I'm hoping that, like I said, anybody listening to this podcast maybe has never been like this, but at some point, we really just need to look at the people who are actually, like, being misogynistic and just be like, you're just an idiot. Like, it's really just not even, sure, maybe it's funny to them, but it's not funny, really, to anybody with half of a brain. Like, if you really are, like, making any jokes about about anything that have to do with these women on the court and any of the things that we know are the misogynistic tropes we've seen over the past few years, you have half a brain, and that's not. unfortunately, I think maybe that's not to, I don't know, whatever. I don't have any respect for you if you're doing that. I'm going to be 100% honest. I'm standing on business. I think that's what the kids are saying in the streets. I'm standing on business here, and I don't think it's really even that controversial, but hoping as content creators, we can see that and not participate and continue to highlight the women in this sport who are changing the landscape of the sport of sports in general. Like we saw it this past year with what happened in the finals or the women's NCAA tournament. And we're going to see if, like I said, if Panini, if they're smart, they will go and they will make a bunch of different sets with Caitlin Clark rookie cards in it. And it's still, and I think the thing is, like, I also don't want to talk necessarily about investing or any of these things when it comes to cards nowadays, modern stuff. I've said this, it's just, don't even think about it. Don't even really try and do any type of investing. But when you look at these cards, I think we're going to get a lot of sets, and it's going to get a lot of popularity, or it's going to gain a lot of traction on social media. And just remember, even if there's 5 sets, that's a fraction of what there are for other sports. So you are buying a set that's really, I think, still fairly new when it comes to any of the women's cards that Panini is going to come out with. I believe Cameron Brink is also on an exclusive, but like I said, Panini, they really had no choice but to sign Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese. Like, I don't even know what those, like, I wouldn't be surprised if the Caitlin Clark contract was a similar price to the Zion contract. Like, based on like what those players did for just the collective of that sport, I think it's really, really pretty mind-boggling. And like I said, if Panini's smart over the next this next year, hopefully they're smart enough to have planned for this and to know that there's going to be an audience of people who want these cards, and there's also going to be such a new, larger audience of people that want this card because of what has happened over the past few months with the rise of Caitlin Clark, Angel Reese, all of these stars that have shown that it doesn't really matter if you're a male or a female in a sport. You can still play that sport and dominate and be in the news and be the best player in the world. And it doesn't matter it doesn't matter which sport you're playing or anything like that. So, like I said, hopefully that Panini does this. Hopefully we see some, maybe some imagery of Prism. I think that would be really cool. I don't know when they plan on coming out with this year's Prism, but now that the draft has happened, we know what teams the players are going to get on. So I would imagine Panini probably starts. They have to have started already this process of getting these players into the product, and hopefully we see a Prism product soon. Golden Auctions had been posting updates or previews for this card, this mystery card that they had that apparently was supposed to be the crown jewel of sports cards, and I'll admit it is a very impressive card. Is it the best sports card of all time? I might even argue that it could be. They were posting updates basically saying that they had this mystery card and it was this crazy card and no one had seen it in 20 years and no one knew where it came from, or people knew where it came from, but no one had seen it in 20 years basically. And it's the 1/1 Michael Jordan Logo Man autograph that I believe that came out of the LeBron, like the LeBron Upper Deck product. The 2003 Ultimate Collection Michael Jordan 1/1 Logo Man autograph. Now this I would say is probably it's probably one of the biggest cards of all time. I mean, it back then these types of cards were not super common. We didn't really, like, I think I talked about Carvin probably either last week or the week before, where he was talking about how he invented, or he was on the team, or he took a lot of credit for it, I'm going to believe his story. I haven't heard anybody else come out and say that he's not telling the truth about that. So, like, he basically invented the exquisite product. And this is, it says Ultimate Collection, so I'm looking up, I'm actually sort of reading like an article about it right now, as I'm just trying to find if, I don't think that this is the same as that LeBron Exquisite product, because I think it would have said Exquisite probably, but it has to be one of the first. This card is the only one of its kind in existence, and is a signed Jordan Logo Man card featuring the NBA legend in a Bulls jersey, is what this article says. This probably would have been the first patch autograph for Michael Jordan, since, like I said, that had not really been a product style until they really started coming out with Exquisite. So this would have been the first, and just like trying to rack my brain, this is probably one of the only cards that's like this, with the patch, with the autograph, being a one of one. You know, most Logo Men patches are in one of one cards, which I actually think they maybe use the Logo Man a little bit too loosely. I get that it's an important card for a one of one, but like, I mean, they were using the one of the Logo Man patches in like Prism, like the Prism blockchain cards, and just like really adding it into like a ton of different sets to obviously add value on their end, where they can probably charge a little bit more if they're putting these cards in there. But I don't know. I mean, it's really, again, I think you can do a one of one with, and this is more recently. Obviously, this card that I'm talking about, the Michael Jordan, there aren't other ones. But I'm talking about nowadays. There are ways to do one of ones without them all being Logo Mans. I almost think that they should, I don't know. I almost wish that they would keep them exclusive to certain products, so that way they don't overuse the concept. Especially just from the fact that, like, all the Logo Men patches are coming from just like player worn stuff. They're not coming from game worn stuff. Some of the higher end, like, you know, I maybe National Treasures, but even National Treasures, to be honest, might not be a game worn patch. Like maybe Impeccable or Immaculate. I know there was that one Logo Man, triple Logo Man, that was like that brought Drake into the sports card world, which is pretty, you know, it's not very often you see a card with. It's not very often you just see a card bring in one of the most famous people of all time into cards, and he was opening up those cases, well, boxes, because boxes and cases. I think they had a bunch of cases, which they have the briefcases, essentially, that have the cards in them, and I think it's like a 5 or 6 card pack, and he had been chasing that triple LeBron Logo Man, which had Logo Man from all of the team, from a jersey that LeBron had worn with each of the teams. So you can see the difference in the logo, which I thought was pretty cool. Like, it had a logo from the early Cavs days, and then it had a logo from the Miami Heat days, and then it had a logo from the new Lakers uniforms, obviously, because that's the most recent one. But I don't know. I mean, the card is up for auction on Golden Auctions. I think with it being such a historic card, like, this is the type of card that I would like to see almost in a museum, maybe. Like, it just feels like it's such a historic piece of sports card history that it feels like somebody shouldn't own the card. It should be owned by a museum, or it should be owned by someone who's going to have it on display more often. And that also kind of gets me into a point where I've talked about museums and trying to figure out how to display cards, and I think it's tough because it's like, again, sports cards is like a niche. I mean, it's like coming up with like some sort of, like, I don't know, like a sneaker museum or something along those lines, where it's like it's probably tough to build something like that and have a fan base in an area that would be willing to travel to that area. I don't know. I mean, a traveling one I think would be fine. Like, if, I don't know. I mean, maybe they could do one at, like, shows. Like, do, like, a mobile museum where they... And I know that that would require probably a lot of security and a lot of, like, logistics, figuring out how to get everything from place to place, because it's, you know, you'd probably have to You're not just flying, you're not just putting that stuff in your carry-on and then jumping on a flight. Like, that's stuff that probably gets transported by, like, armored truck, realistically. Like, that's stuff that's not even going in the air. That's stuff that's, that's the type of stuff that, like, there's that urban legend of, like, the only two people know the Coca-Cola recipe, the official recipe, and they're not allowed to fly on a plane at the same time. This is probably something similar where I would not be putting this stuff in my carry-on. Like, even when I traveled out to National, I had 2 suitcases, and I had to check one of my suitcases. The cards that I was bringing, I put in my suitcase I was bringing on the plane. Like, there was no way that I was putting that stuff under the plane, get tossed around and all that kind of stuff. But, after 20 years, if you watch the video that Golden put out, or Ken Golden, he talked about how this card had not been seen for 20 years, which, that I think makes it a historic card. I wonder if this was, let's say, I don't know, pre-sports card boom, maybe. I think it still has the importance of, being a card that came from, like, being a one of one on card autograph is still going to hold such an important mainstay in the hobby. And like I said, I guess maybe it'll be a shame that somebody will own this card, and who knows what's going to happen. Like, we may never see the card again. It looks like the bidding is starting at $250,000 or $250,000. So we're already in the almost $250,000. Does this card sell for $1 million? I think probably. I mean, it's one of those pieces of that could, I think, transcend just sports cards in general. Like, I think it could be something that gets more mainstream attention, like organic more mainstream attention. I'm not talking about like that Babe Ruth card that whoever was selling the card or the auction house bought a bunch of placement in a bunch of random, online newspapers. I'm talking about like ESPN and places talking about this like organically because I'm reading an article from The Score, which that used to be a company that was owned by Barstool potentially. Maybe they don't own that company anymore, because I haven't really seen them do much with that. I think it was like, I'm not 100% sure but that's actually kind of not, that's beside the point. But I'm reading the article on The Score. I think that as we get closer, this card is going to keep getting attention. So you're going to see it a ton on social media. So again, just get ready for this card to be everywhere. I think, you're going to see Ken Golden. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, Michael Jordan has never really came into the sports card world, but like, if we were to see him somehow if we were to see images with him holding this card, or him having something to do with the sale of this card, that wouldn't surprise me because of the rarity of it. It's not like there's multiple versions. Like, this is a one of one, and I don't know. I mean, I would argue that this is potentially one of the most important Jordan cards of all time. Maybe, one of the most important sports cards of all time. If we're talking just cards in general, this would probably be on the Mount Rushmore, in my opinion. Not just base cards, because base cards, I think, is a different conversation, but I think that this is one of the more historic cards, and it's going to be selling. I'm guessing the auctions are probably a week or 2 weeks, probably maybe the end of April, we'll see a sale of this card. But does it sell for over $1 million? I mean, it could, I think. I mean, like I said, it's probably one of the most important Jordan cards of all time. So I guess we'll see what happens with the promotion of this card and everything on social media over the next few weeks. Today's show is going to be, it's sort of 2 parts. I think it has a similar theme of 2 stories that I've seen, or not. Well, one's not even really a story. Well, yeah, no, I guess one is a story technically. So first, that player for Toronto, Jonte Davis, got a lifetime ban from the NBA for betting on himself and betting on his team, and apparently people were saying they were digging into some of the bets, and he apparently bet against, in a parlay, he included the Raptors to lose, which is like, dude, come on, what are we really doing here? It's wild. and he only made like 20 grand or something, where he was making 2 million, like being a two-way player in the G League and then in the NBA. And similar story we have with Shohei Ohtani with the gambling thing. As gambling has become more and more popular, I don't know. I don't necessarily. I hope that there aren't more stories like this, but, over the next 5-10 years, I wouldn't be surprised if there are going to be more stories of players who are betting actively. Because, we also saw Calvin Ridley, an NFL player who got in trouble for gambling, which I think the argument that I saw, Boston Sports Radio was talking about it when this story first broke, and it's, although the leagues and all of the sports media companies in the country are sponsored have a gambling sponsor, I don't think that gives a pass to players to be betting at all. I think if you are playing in the league, I don't even think you really should have to be told not to bet. It should just be known that you can't be betting on the sport, or you just can't be betting at all. Which I think that goes to, I think that this should just be a cautionary tale of gambling and how addictive it can be. Because a normal person, a person who isn't addicted to gambling or isn't addicted to a thing, would look at this story and say, what an idiot. Like, what is he doing? He could make $2 million or $3 million playing in the NBA versus $20K, $20K betting on himself and stuff like that. And it's like, yeah, to someone who isn't addicted to gambling, they would look at that and say, well, that doesn't make much sense. But someone who, I think, to someone who can view the situation from an outside perspective, that's just, it feels like it's almost just like, that's the story. That's just the story. That's almost the story every single time. It's like the person who is addicted to gambling is going to make the decision that doesn't make sense to a person who isn't addicted to gambling. Same with Shohei Ohtani's interpreter. Like, clearly, and he also had a huge bankroll too, which I think, if we're going to say Shohei Ohtani wasn't involved, I think he wasn't involved in the gambling. I think that he was bankrolling the interpreter for sure. Like, I think he knew that the interpreter was gambling and was just like, yeah, I can just back you, like, whatever you lose, like, it's fine. Like, I have $1 trillion now because I'm one of the highest paid baseball players of all time, or I'm going to be. And then we have the other piece of the story is Zion. Zion Williamson looks like he's hurt again, leading into the playoffs. Didn't play in the play-in game that would lead them to the playoffs. And I think I was looking at this, someone posted his Prism Silver PSA 10 sold for $6,000, and now you can buy those for around like $350. And the whole piece of this is just a warning. If you're, I think that you are gambling if you are buying into prospects. And I think we've seen a lot of, and I actually think we've seen people talk about the addiction that people have within sports cards, because also sports cards were a thing that Shohei Ohtani's interpreter were getting into, and the addictive aspect of cards, like, I think it's there, and I don't know how you can talk about it more. I have seen more people talk about it over the past few years than I really ever have, which I think is definitely a good step in the right direction. But it also goes down to, if you're gambling, and I'm going to say gambling on prospects, you potentially might be able to buy, like, Shohei Ohtani. If you thought that Jonte Davis was any good, like maybe you were buying some of his cards are now worthless, essentially. Zion, as much as he is such a phenomenal, I think whenever he's healthy, he is a really solid player. He's not, a number one player like everyone was saying. People, and myself included, I think I definitely fell into the hype of that player and the story and everything around Zion Williamson. And like I talked about, I think probably on a podcast maybe yesterday or the day before, with maybe Caitlin Clark as another example of people just being infatuated with this player who is like becoming transcending to that is transcending a sport, basically. And Zion did that, I think, for the NBA, if I'm going to be honest. And I think Caitlin Clark is doing that for the WNBA right now. I think that whole draft class really is. And, if this is, this is also a warning for anybody WNBA. And I know I talked about how I think the cards are good. The statistic with the WNBA is they're looking to expand. That's definitely a good thing. But the one thing that I don't think people really realize with the WNBA is that only 50, usually in most of the last few drafts, only about 50% of the players end up even making the roster. So I don't know when you got to lock in your players for cards for this upcoming season, but like I think a good example was like the number one pick, which I don't think Caitlin Clark is this, but the number one pick in I think it was 2021 was Chicago's, and that player is not in the WNBA anymore. Didn't even make the roster. Didn't even make the opening. Didn't even make the roster. Didn't even make it. So there's always cautionary tales, and I always, as I have this podcast and we do it every single day. And I know that, if I'm doing this once a month or twice a month or, whatever, giving this PSA, I'm hoping that eventually, hoping that every time I give this PSA, one person can take the advice and really look at it and say, maybe take a step back and look at how they've been viewing cards or how they've been collecting or how they've been buying and say, oh, whoa, maybe I am spending a little bit too much money on prospects and gambling on these prospects. Especially because you just look at it, it's like these players are people too. And I think that's another thing that we don't really realize. Like we think that because they're millionaires that they're never going to make bad decisions. And clearly that player for the Raptors, obviously with a lifetime ban, made a horrible decision over the course of a couple years, which that's how it wasn't one decision. It wasn't one decision. It was multiple decisions, multiple times over the course of a couple years. Now with Ohtani, there was a chance that he was going to get wrapped up in this. I think if Ohtani honestly isn't like the best player in the league, like if he is like a top 100 player, there's a chance that he gets suspended and he's not really playing as much because he's the number one player. I'm sure they were trying to, and he just signed this massive contract. He's the face of the league. He's the face of baseball right now, in my opinion. I think that they put a squash to that story pretty quickly and put a squash to the Ohtani being involved. And, with Zion, I think unfortunately, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen with him. Like I said, I definitely fell into the hype of buying those cards, or not buying the cards, but talking about the player and being like, he's going to transcend the league. It's going to be crazy. But I do also think that like with him, it's like, I think he's going to have those flashes. So it's like when he has those flashes, that's where you're probably going to see some increases in his cards. Like if the Pelicans ever make it deep in the playoffs and Zion's playing, like that's where you got to sell. And I mean, if you haven't sold your Zion cards yet, your best bet is just to hold on to them. I mean, if I'm going to be completely honest, like there's really, there's no point in selling them for pennies on the dollar when you were buying them for whatever the opposite of that is. Buying it on the dollar for, I don't know what the opposite of that expression is, but you were buying them for more than you should have been. So you're probably holding them at a pretty significant loss. So, when I talked about some of the money leaving sports cards previously in an episode, that's also another big thing that I think has happened. It's like the money has left cards, but then also what has been left in the wake of that huge tsunami of money leaving is that like the card values also decreased so significantly that it was like you're seeing so much, I'm going to use the word wealth. I don't know if that's exactly the correct word there, but you're seeing so much equity. I think that's probably a better word. You're seeing so much equity being lost within the hobby that it's a combination of both those things. And then I think also there's a phrase within the financial world, and I forget exactly the saying or the phrase, but it's something along the lines of when things are going up, everyone thinks it's the best investment in the world. When things are going down, everyone thinks it's the worst investment in the world. And I think we're in a place where sports cards are going down they're going down significantly. So I think we're in that going down period. Do they go up? I don't know. I mean, I think that with what happened in 2020, I think we probably won't see things get to that point again. Do we get to a point where maybe we're looking at prices being, higher than 2018, 2019? Yeah, probably. But at the same time, it's like, I just don't know if it's the investing aspect of it. You really have to look at it more of a short-term play than a long-term play, unless your long-term play is 10, 15 years down the road. That's where I would look at some of those short-term plays. But, if you're buying cards at this point, you really should just be kind of hoping that, you're gambling. That's what you're doing. You're gambling at this point now. Like, it was a surefire. It was a surefire investment that you made back in 2018, 2019, or even before that, 2016, 2017, leading into 2020. Now it's just not like that anymore. So, all that said, it's important to always monitor your spending, and always to, when you're buying something or you're buying a lot of something, to take a step back and really realize, that this could go to zero, and you really have to be in a spot where if it goes to zero, that you're not going to be in financial ruins, because, whether we like it or not, that probably has happened a few times over the past few years within sports cards. But as long as you are careful and you are monitoring things and you're actually taking a step back and you're doing smart research yourself, you're probably in a better spot, but you still need to make sure that you are taking the precautions and not really putting yourself in a position where you could be in a lot of trouble financially if some of these cards end up just going to zero. So it has been, I don't know, maybe a little bit of a slow, it must be a slow news week, because the drama, and I don't even know if I really could consider it drama, but I don't know what what was going on Twitter yesterday really was odd, and I don't even really know if I want to cover it too much. I have another shorter topic that I'll probably cover, but I don't know exactly how long the episode will be necessarily. But basically, apparently from what I've heard and from what people have said on Twitter is that Eric Whiteback is running the Topps social media account now, or the Topps Twitter account, which I don't know, whatever. You can have whatever opinions you want on him. I think ultimately he's a figure within sports cards that I guess is controversial, just from the fact that, from his the way he was curating his content for a while was maybe not as ethical as a lot of people on Twitter thought it should be. But so that's where I think some of this actually stems from, if I'm going to be completely honest. So, I don't know, there was a golfer apparently, and he bought a bunch of cards, and, his son pulled a 1 of 1, I believe it was a Max Verstappen card. And and this is one of the things where on Twitter, sometimes this can happen. I know I've talked about this in the past, where people will, they'll say stuff and it won't be real, and I try to stay away from the conversations about conversations. I do it sometimes, for sure, on the show, but I try and stay away from it, because more or less that's what I end up finding on Twitter, Instagram, whatever it is. The conversation's about a conversation. People are angry that people are angry. That's where I find, that can happen pretty frequently on social media in general. But so people, I saw people complaining about, loaded boxes and all of these things, and it's oh my God, guys, what are we doing here? This is so, I guess maybe some of the, some of the pushback is maybe from, who's running the account. That could be some of it, or it's just people just don't have anything else to do. And I mean, this is, like I said, this is I guess it's a PSA to people. It's if you're getting angry at someone on Twitter, a kid, not even an adult. If you are getting angry because a kid pulled a card and he was excited to pull the card, just log off for the day. Go watch a Disney movie, go outside, take your shoes off, take your socks off, just stick your feet in the dirt, do something that's going to ground yourself, because it's really sort of insane. And it is a sort of an insanity that stems probably from there not being as much news also. And maybe it's the running, whoever runs the account. I don't know, whatever it is. But that's sort of the beginning of this episode here. And like I said, it's just, I don't know. I wrote out a bunch of tweets, honestly making fun of people who are actually angry. But then I just erased them because I'm like, I don't even really feel like getting into this. Whatever, it's not really that big of a deal. The other, I guess, big story within baseball is that Jack Leiter, who some of you may remember probably back in 2021 or 2022, he was in that first 3 draft picks, and coming from Vanderbilt, he pitched with Kumar Rocker, who was also then, I believe he was drafted, but then he didn't go to the team, so he went back to college and played another year, and then was drafted again to actually the Rangers, I believe. So they were going to be they were teammates at Vanderbilt, and I believe that they were both drafted by the Rangers. But so Jack Leiter was a phenomenal pitcher for Vanderbilt. I mean, Kumar Rocker, Jack Leiter, 2 of the best college pitchers probably of all time. Like, I believe they won the national championship that last year that they both played together. They were phenomenal. So, like I said, Jack Leiter, one thing that was interesting, I saw Suze actually talking about this on Twitter, where she was saying, she had posted some picture. I think there had been some news that he was potentially getting the call up. He did get called up, by the way. That's maybe the other point. Maybe I'm burying the lead here a little bit. He's getting called up and he's making his debut. But he doesn't have, I guess he has an exclusive with Panini, like an exclusive to the point where he wasn't even in Bowman. Like, he didn't have any Bowman cards. So if you go to search for any of his cards, he just doesn't have them. Like, if you go to search for Jack Leiter Bowman, they're all Panini cards that show up, and that was weird to me. He didn't even have like a regular base card, which I thought was very odd. And the reason why I think this maybe is news is because he's going to be a big name rookie in this year. And there was a picture that Topps posted of his debut jersey with the debut patch. So again, Suze actually is kind of one person I've been following a little bit from this story. And she brought up an interesting point where she was like, oh, does this mean he's going to have autographs with Topps? Like, does this mean he's finally going to be getting cards? Because he wasn't in 2021 Bowman draft, and then he wasn't in regular 2022 Bowman either. So he doesn't have any Topps or Bowman cards. It's all Panini. And they're all, I don't even think they're minor league cards. Like, they might be a lot of like draft cards. And I think there's a couple Team USA cards in there as well. But if he's going to have this debut patch card, you would presume that it's probably going to be an autograph. I don't know. This is, I think, one of the first times we've really seen a athlete that could have a baseball Topps card that has been an exclusive on Panini and hasn't really had any autographs, because it just doesn't really happen that often. So, I think that's why I think this is interesting news from a sports card perspective, baseball perspective, that he has this patch card, or he's going to, and is he going to have any autographs? And then also, does that mean, and I think all of our questions will be answered once Topps comes out with his Topps Now card, because if there are going to be autographs within that Topps Now set, then I would say that probably guarantees that he's going to have an autograph on that patch card. But if the car, but also the design might be different too. That's kind of the other thing that I think is maybe another nuance to this. The design, I guess, would be different. I mean, unless they want to do like how Upper Deck does some of their exquisite products where they use the same design, which, by the way, I actually am a fan of, if I'm going to be honest, of the concept of a product using the same design over the course of many years. I actually think that's I don't think that's a big deal. I know some people that would say that they don't really like it because over the past few years they've come out with more Upper Deck designs with the exclusive, or with Upper Deck cards with the exquisite design from that original LeBron product. And I know people don't really like that, but like I said, I'm fine with it. I think that actually is kind of cool for branding, if I'm going to be honest. I get maybe there's a staleness that comes with that. Maybe it's like maybe they have 2 designs or 3 designs, and every couple years they filter through them, I guess, would be one solution for people who maybe don't like that style or don't like that concept. But so if his Topps Now card, which whenever you're listening to this, he may have already had it. The sale of it may already be over, like I said, depending on when you're listening to this podcast. So, he may have that autograph, and if he does, that means he's probably going to have the autograph on on this patch card, which also they haven't, we're not even, I don't know, I mean, I guess we're kind of close to the deadline. We're getting kind of close a little bit here, if I'm going to be honest, to the deadline of when, actually, are we? Maybe not. Maybe, now that I'm thinking about it, it's like, it's either May or June. I forget off the top of my head when Topps really does the cutoff for like when people are going to be in that next product. There's no way that they're at the point yet, because we're still in April. We're still in the first month of the season. But that is a thing that Topps has done in the past, is, moved around that date and tried to figure out, like Ellie De La Cruz, for example, has rookie cards this year, when last year, I mean, he was electric, and he made his debut the day after they switched, which, like I said, I think that's a little bit too coincidental, if I'm going to be honest. So I don't know, but Jack Leiter, he's going to have those cards, and if he doesn't if he doesn't have some sort of autograph exclusive with Panini, or if he does that mean we're going to get some other different type of design with this patch, or like what they're going to do with the patch? I don't know. I think we haven't really, like I said, he'll be the first player that I can think of as of recently that has been exclusive with Panini really like that, or just hasn't had any Topps cards. So he's going to, which is also the crazy thing, is that he's also going to be a player who, when he gets his first Topps card, it's going to be his first one. Like, he wasn't in any other Topps product, at least from when I was doing my research and I was looking on eBay. All of his cards were Panini. So, like I said, this may not have been a story that I would have talked about if there was more news. It's been a little bit slow. I mean, I don't know. As a content creator, sometimes that can happen where you want to, there just aren't as many things to talk about, so you kind of have to find something, which I think actually, luckily, this story kind of popped up. And then the weird thing with, the stuff with the kid on Twitter, like I said, I don't know. These are two stories that are, I don't know, interesting. It's kind of from a sports card perspective, it's like, I don't know. It is what it is. It seems like, there's going to be people who are just angry about whatever they want to be angry about, and they don't really care if, they don't really care. It's just a kid. Like, that's kind of the other thing. It's like, you think that kid doesn't have social media? Like, you don't think the kid knows that people are angry at him? And it's like, it's not even like they're angry at him. They're angry at Topps, but like, kids don't even know that. So that's, I think, another, honestly, and this is sort of where I'm going to wrap up the episode here, but another, again, I don't know, a PSA or whatever. It's like, relax, everybody, relax. Like, I don't understand why everyone's so angry about it. It's like, come on, like, the kid, like I said, the kid has social media. I don't know what it is, but every kid nowadays has social media. So they're going on Twitter, they're going on Instagram, whatever, and they're seeing everyone that's angry at them for no reason, really. Like, I don't know. So whatever. So those are kind of the main topics for this episode. Again, don't really, hopefully maybe next week there'll be a little bit on. Let's see, probably next Thursday night, actually, I'm going to be running this crazy 36-hour race. So, if Danny has to fill in for me on Friday, which this is maybe me asking Danny, hey, can you fill in for me next Friday? Because the race is 24 hours, starts Friday at midnight, ends Saturday at noon. So maybe I need to text, I'll text Danny. And this is where I'm going to end the episode. Thank you for listening. If you're listening to this on either Friday or you're listening to it on Saturday, make sure to tune back here on Monday. If you're listening on Saturday, if you're listening on Friday, make sure to tune in on Saturday, because we have our weekly episode with all of the stuff. Hopefully you enjoyed this week's episodes. Let us know what you thought on Instagram, Twitter, all that stuff. Thank you all for listening.